Good to see everybody here tonight. If you're wondering where you are, here's a little teaser reminder: native plant advocacy in Salish lands, and we're super thrilled to have Angelina Rose here as part of her residency at the Wild Bird Trust of BC tonight, being able to share some of her research and her knowledge with us as part of that kind of engaged process, which we like. What's the point of knowledge if it's not mobilized and helping and teaching and bringing forward folks? And that's the point of our residency program. We've had 5 residents in the past couple of years. Bree McDaniels, Rachel George from Tsleil-Waututh. She had a residency with the late Lee Miracle, and Jonas Jones from Tsleil-Waututh, Kendra Scanlon, a landscape architect, and Angelina Rose. And super thrilled to have you here. It's interesting here at the Wild Bird Trust, just to let folks know, my name is Irwin Oostindie, and Sonakala was planning to be here tonight, but she is not feeling well today. So you've got myself and Angelina, and as many of you saw at Angelina's advocacy work many months ago, bring these critical public policy issues to the forefront. It's just fantastic to be able to spend some time to deep dive into that knowledge sharing tonight. The Wild Bird Trust of BC, we're a provincial advocacy group, and I'll just set the tone for why we're hosting Angelina as a researcher. 5 years ago, we started a process of redress, bypassing reconciliation, going straight to redress. And most of our work is here at Maplewood Flats in Tsleil-Waututh lands and waters. And I am the president of the board, but our organization is actually quite unique in that the majority of our board members and the trustees, the governors of our organization of the Wild Bird Trust of BC, are Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish members. So that's probably one of the first conservation organizations in British Columbia that's given up its trusteeship, the majority of the trusteeship, to local First Nations. That's symbolic of the type of work that we're doing. Understanding that birds are not separated and glyphosates are not separated, and that ornithology is not separated. Just the way that Western science has done so much harm by being siloed and separated. And we're here tonight, and as part of this research sharing from Angelina, that the health of habitat for wild birds and the health of food gathering sites for Salish peoples, those are the same issue. And siloing it into separate boxes, as Western science has typically done for centuries, is really harmful for birds. It's harmful for Indigenous people. And the Wild Bird Trust of BC now recognizes that we can't be protecting and advocating for wild birds separated from the issue of sovereignty for lands and waters by and for First Nations peoples here. So in that opening remarks, I want to pass the floor to Angelina Hopkins Rose, who we're just thrilled to have as our research in residence with Wild Bird Trust of BC. And thank you for everybody being here tonight.
Okay, thank you, Irwin. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to start with an introduction in my language. Aswa'alap inshnuknukwa, amash atzchen tumos ama, Angelina Hopkins Rose and Squatchicha, in Kwakwat Mochgan, Haslet Mochgan, Chipscan Akupankupa, St'at'imc and Lata New Westminster Hat Swanwa, Nish Heidi Rose, Tat and Shkikaza, Nish Alan Hopkins, Tat and Shkatzaza, Nish, oh, there's my little recording in case I forgot that one. Nish Violet May Thavarj, Tat and Kukwa, Nish Harry Hopkins, Nat and Shpazbapiza, Nish Ritva Helena Gokkonen, Tat and Kukwa, Nish Yakarantanen, Na and Shpazbapiza, Nish Ronnie Dean Harris, Ta and Quatemsha, Nish Emmett Jack Harris, Ta and Shkayoch Shkuza, and Watchgan Kwalautum. So I just told you who I was, who my family is, and that I am a berry picker. So I am going to go over the schedule. First, I'm going to talk about pests, what BC timber sales has defined as a pest. I'm going to talk about the importance of broadleaf plant species, herbicides, wild salmon, of course. Then I'm going to give myself a little break. We're going to listen to some music. I'm going to talk about my work in this matter, the issue with pest management plans, NITs, food sovereignty and FPIC, solutions. I can hear somebody's kid.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's me. Bye.
Hi, baby Misa. That's my niece. Solutions, how you can help, and then I'm going to do another music break and then a question and answers. I know it seems like a lot, and it is, but this topic is really intense. It has been a huge learning curve for me and my fiance, Ronnie. Sorry, that's the first time I said that. And yeah, there's just a lot to talk about. So first I'm going to talk about pests. What is a pest management plan? A pest management plan, which I'll call a PMP from here on out, outlines how a logging company manages pests. So what is a pest? When I first heard the term, I assumed that it was an invasive species, but this is how BC Timber Sales defines a pest. I'll give you a minute to look over that, see if you recognize any of these plant names. So what you're seeing here is a list of native plants. All of those are native plants, and they're all very important plants to First Nations people. And so I think the title Pest Management Plan is quite misleading because BC Timber Sales, and here I'm going to be talking mostly about BC Timber Sales because that's who put forward this pest management plan, but we have to remember that they only control, I think it's 19% of the logging in BC. So there's a lot of other logging companies who also follow these same practices. So these logging companies aren't targeting pests like invasive species, they're actually targeting native broadleaf plant species that are super important to Indigenous people. So here I'm going to go into the importance of broadleaf plants. So I kind of divided up that table and put them into categories of food, medicine, and ceremony. So when I read that table, I was like, wait, those are all my favorite foods, like salmon berries, huckleberries, thimbleberries, Saskatoon, salal, blueberries, hazelnuts, mushrooms. Like, I'm a huge berry picker. If you know me, my favorite thing in the world is berry picking. So I just couldn't believe when I looked at this pest management plan and saw that that was considered a pest. They also have on here Indian hellebore, Labrador tea, cottonwood, fireweed, and elderberry, which we all traditionally use as medicines. And then there's also some plants that we use in ceremonies, such as devil's club and ocean spray. So yeah, these plants, all of these plants have cultural significance to Indigenous people, but they're also really important to the animals that live in our ecosystem. Like bears rely on the berries to sustain themselves before the salmon come. Bees and other pollinators feed off the flowers of many of these plants. Birds rely on the berries. They also rely on the pollinators because they eat a lot of bugs. And broadleaf plants such as aspens are a main food source for deer, elk, and moose. These plants are also really, really important to the land because broadleaf plants are what they call a fire break. So they're much more resistant to catching fire. So they're not going to fuel a forest fire, and they can actually slow down or even stop a forest fire because of the amount of moisture that they hold in their leaves and in the roots. As forest fires are unfortunately becoming more common, it's just completely counterintuitive to be ripping out these plants from the land. They also have deep root systems, which can actually communicate with other plants, and they can trade water and nutrients, which I thought was really cool to learn. But these roots also hold the soil in place, which prevents landslides and flooding, like the devastating flooding that we saw in November. So taking these plants out of the land, it just makes no sense. So all these plants listed in that table from BC Timber Sales are culturally significant plants and medicines that local Indigenous people have harvested and relied upon for thousands of years. These plants are foods and medicines. They're important culturally, and they're also vital parts of our local ecosystems. So why would the forest industry, the logging industry, want to remove these important plants? It's capitalism. You may have guessed that. Logging companies are looking to make as much money as quickly as possible. So they clear cut our forests, they sell the lumber, they replant only coniferous trees, and they want to make sure they grow as fast as possible so they can cut them down and sell them again. So these native plants provide too much shade over the little saplings that they replant. So they're cut down, they're ripped out of the ground, or they're sprayed with herbicides, or sometimes injected with herbicides. That's it. That's the only reason. They just shade out these little baby sapling trees. That's the reason they have these whole pest management plans. I was very underwhelmed and angry when I learned that that was the whole reason that they're targeting our indigenous plants. I think somebody could mute themselves. I hear a little bit of sound. Check if you're muted. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you. So now I'm going to talk about herbicides. This is a chart taken from what BC Timber Sales put in their notice of a development of a pest management plan. So this kind of lists what herbicides they're planning to use: glyphosate, tricloper, and 2,4-D. So I'm going to talk about glyphosate. It's a herbicide commercially known as Roundup. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's a non-selective herbicide, meaning it will kill any plant that it touches. The World Health Organization found it to be probably carcinogenic to humans. It's been found to increase the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma by 41%. It's been the subject of many lawsuits, and it's very controversial. There are bans and restrictions all across the world. And right now, Health Canada is actually, they approved it, they said it's okay. And then Safe Food Matters took them to court and said that they didn't follow the proper protocols that they're supposed to follow. So Health Canada actually has to go over the regulations around glyphosate again. So that just came up, I think, in May. So there might be some changes coming to Canada about the regulations surrounding glyphosate. What does it kill? So besides targeting all our berries and our native plants, it also kills the mycelia, which is a fungal root system within the soil that allows plants and trees to talk to each other through the soil. Suzanne Simard, if you haven't heard of her, she's amazing. She's a professor of forest ecology at UBC, and she wrote a book called Finding the Mother Tree, which goes into depth about this. I started a while ago. It is super intense. It's really amazing. I'm listening to it on Audible, actually. I highly recommend reading that. This is a chart. I'll let you take a look at that. The study came out almost a year ago, last August, and it talks about how glyphosate can remain in the land for over 10 years. So when I've been reading about glyphosate and its regulations, most of the studies talk about its effect on humans, but we also have to remember we're not the only people here. We're not the only beings here. We have to think about how this affects the animals. We have to think about how it affects the salmon and the land itself. So the fact that it can remain in soil for 12 years, I think there's a lot we don't know about it right now. Even BC Timber Sales admits this in their pest management plan. They talk about the effects of glyphosate on actually all three herbicides on traditional use, and they're all listed as high impact, meaning the treatment area becomes unsuitable for traditional use for a few years. So for me, it's very scary to learn that the places that me and my partner have harvested berries before, the places I ate as a kid, they could have previously been sprayed with glyphosate. I have no idea. When I got pregnant, my first thing was I want to pick some berries. It was summer. I was I'm going to pick some berries for when my son is born. And we made a bunch of jam with them. And, after learning this, I wondered, what if there's glyphosate in that jam that I fed Emma Jack when he was a baby? It's very scary. I mentioned glyphosate is banned in a lot of countries. Not going to read this out, but you can see these countries some of them have a full ban on glyphosate. Some of them just have a partial ban or a lot of restrictions, or they're trying to ban it. You can see Canada's on that list as it's banned in Quebec, and it's actually banned in the city of Vancouver. So when we look at the map later from BC Timber Sales, you'll be able to see that it just goes all around the city of Vancouver. But glyphosate is not the only herbicide. There's also triclofor and 2,4-D. So triclofor is a herbicide used to kill broadleaf plants. It's a systemic herbicide, meaning it's absorbed through the roots and it kills the plant from the inside out. Now this, I'm not an expert at any of this stuff. I'm definitely not an expert about herbicides, but what I've read about triclofor, the way that BC Timber Sales is planning to use it is through a basil tree infusion. It's like they put it in the bark of the tree, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to use the ester form, which is what they talk about in this quote, saying it's highly toxic and it can build up in fish, which of course is one of our main priorities. And 2,4-D, it's commercially known as Formula 40. It's actually injected into the root system of a tree to kill them, which I just think is really awful. It's very toxic to water, humans, and plants. If disposed of in the wrong way, it can contaminate groundwater. And there's when you look up the little pamphlet that comes with it when you buy this, it says you have to avoid all contact, not even minute amounts, to other food. So the way BC Timber Sales views the forest isn't as a food source, which is why Indigenous people view it as a food source. So I don't think that's in alignment. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, has stated that 2,4-D possibly causes cancer in humans. It's all bad. And now we're going to go into wild salmon. Wild salmon is a keystone species, both ecologically, meaning if wild salmon didn't exist, our ecosystem would collapse. Our entire ecosystem in British Columbia relies on wild salmon. The reason that we have a logging industry in the first place, the reason that British Columbia exists in the first place is because of wild salmon. And that is because when white people came here and decided to colonize, first they wanted fur, and then there was the gold rush, but then they got into logging. And we had huge, beautiful old growth trees all around British Columbia. And those trees are as big as they were and as healthy as they were because of wild salmon. And Ronnie taught me this, so I have to give him credit for this. Sorry, my best friend just came up on the thing. Michaela Whitelaw's in the waiting room. Hi, Mimi. So wild salmon. So bears, of course, eat salmon. And bears will pluck a salmon out of the river, and they only want the fattiest part, which is the belly. So they'll take a big bite of the belly and they'll throw it into the forest. And when that salmon decomposes, all the nitrogen that they picked up in the ocean before they came up the river goes into the land. And that nitrogen is what has made these incredible forests in BC. So the logging industry, I don't think they really realize that they should be protecting salmon, because salmon is the only reason we have a logging industry in the first place. And salmon is also a cultural keystone, meaning that if there was no wild salmon, our Indigenous cultures in BC would not exist. We don't know what they would look like without salmon. I'm St'at'imc, and our diet used to be 80 to 90% wild salmon. We are salmon people. All Salish people are salmon people, and people up north too. So I cannot say how important wild salmon is to us, but we are unfortunately already having historically low salmon stocks. And I don't think we can have anything. We cannot afford to have anything that might poison our waterways. This year is supposed to be the big run for salmon. And last year, Ronnie's family wasn't even able to have a dry rack fishery. And I think the first time that happened in 2016. And before that, they had a dry rack fishery every single year since time immemorial. And then the DFO said in 2016, there's not enough fish, you can't do it. So we're supposed to have a dry rack fishery. We're supposed to go up to fish camp on July 29th in a couple of days. We're really excited. But it's also sad going up there knowing that this is the big run and we don't know when there's going to be a big run again. Now, that being said, I'm going to give myself a break. I'm going to play you the St'at'imc berry picking song. It's about 3 minutes long. I just need to have a glass of water and calm my nerves because I'm a little nervous. We covered the importance of native broadleaf plants. We covered herbicides, and discuss wild salmon. When we come back, we're going to talk about pest management plan and nits. Now let's see if this is going to work. Oh, I sounded like a real teacher there. Usually my internet is better than this. It's not working. Okay, we're not going to listen to the song. Just take a 3-minute break. I'll be back in 3 minutes. Never mind, you guys are lucky you get to listen to our traditional berry picking song. Here it is. There we go. I hope you enjoyed that. It's one of my favorite songs. We are going to go back to our presentation, which is lost somewhere on my computer. No, that's not where it is. That's strange. I must have closed it. Oh, there we are. Okay, we did our 3-minute break. And now I'm going to go into about, oh, I hope you guys are able to hear it. If you didn't, I'll post it later. It was mostly for me anyway. That song always makes me feel really calm. So my work in this, me and my partner were sent this clipping from the Hope Standard newspaper. On March 22nd of this year, our good friend, Lydia Coop sent that to us. She actually rescues bear cubs who are orphaned in Hope. She runs the Hope Mountain Black Bear Society. She's really amazing. So I guess she was part of an email thread talking about this pest management plan. So this is all that BC Timber Sales had to post publicly about the whole plan. So they had to post this in a local newspaper. It just says who the applicant is, how you can contact them. That email address, by the way, was wrong. So all the emails we tried to send to them didn't go through. They didn't care. It talks about the different herbicides they're going to be using. And it says, if you wish to have more information or relay any concerns, you have 30 days to do so. Didn't really happen like that, which we'll talk about. So I was super upset when I saw that. As I said, it listed all my favorite berries. So I kind of dove into the world of pest management plans. Me and Ronnie started researching it a lot. And I started sharing what I was learning on my Instagram, and the word about it spread way out of our circles, and thousands of emails. I talked to BC Timber Sales. They said they got thousands of letters and emails and calls. They all went unanswered. We're asking them to extend the public consultation period by 90 days. So local nations could look at what the pest management plan was, and local people could take a look at it and say if they had any concerns. They didn't extend the consultation period. It was clear that this is an issue that Indigenous people and British Columbians care a lot about, but what say do we really have in it? After lots of research and phone calls with BC Timber Sales, with the Ministry of Environment, people have been doing this work for a long time, especially James St'at'imc from Stop the Spray. I have to shout him out. I've come to realize that when it comes to pest management in British Columbia, British Columbians have no say. So we're going to talk about the issue of pest management plans, which comes down to a lack of transparency. So logging companies are only required to post one notice announcing a pest management plan in a newspaper, like the one I showed you. It has to be close to where the plan covers. If there's no local newspaper in that city, they can go to the next city. If there's no local paper in that one, they don't have to post anything at all. In the year 2022, they're still not required to post anything online. After the notice is posted, there's supposed to be a 30-day public consultation period. But as we saw from all our unanswered calls and emails, there's no way for the public to actually dispute any aspect of the pest management plan or even get more details, like where they're going to be spraying. After a pest management plan is submitted to the Ministry of Environment for approval, the rest of the process is done behind closed doors. So that notice we saw is the only thing that is available to the public. So I was learning this, and one day I got a call from a woman named Carrie Skelly, and she's actually the person in charge of pest management plans in BC. And she called me, and she, was convinced I didn't understand anything, and told me that don't worry, BC Timber Sales has to provide detailed maps of the spray sites before any spraying starts. And I was like, perfect. Where can I get the maps? She's like, well, you can't. They're not actually available to the public. They go straight to the ministry. Yeah, they're never made available to the public. And that brings us into the topic of NITS, which stands for Notice of Intent to Treat. So that is the next phase. After they develop a pest management phase, it gets approved, most likely gets approved. And then before spraying actually happens, they often have to submit a Notice of Intent to Treat. So it's supposed to be submitted 21 days before any herbicide application takes place. It details where the herbicides will be used, what plants will be targeted, when the spraying will happen, and the maps of the spray sites. It sounds good, right? But there's no way for the public to access them. Because we never get to see the maps of where and when they'll be spraying, we don't get a chance to dispute it if the spraying will affect our berry and medicine patches. Many people have said, just submit a Freedom of Information request, which is a good idea in theory, but many people have thought of that. And unfortunately, there's no notice posted when a logging company submits a Notice of Intent to Treat. So we wouldn't know when to submit a Freedom of Information request. So even if we knew when to submit an FOI, the notice of intent to treat is only submitted 21 days before the spraying will start. And an average FOI takes 32 days to be fulfilled. Sometimes it takes like a year. So it'd be too late anyway. So once these plans are submitted to the ministry, the public, we're not a part of it anymore. So this is the map I was saying. This is the only map made available to the public by BC Timber Sales. It doesn't specify where they're planning to spray the herbicides. Could be anywhere within these orange boundaries. And none of these spray sites maps are ever made available to the public. The only way that Carrie Scully told me that I could get access to the maps was to make a personal agreement with the logging company, in this case, BC Timber Sales. And I was like, okay, so I just asked them to do it and they do it. And I was like, are they required to do it? And they're not. So if BC Timber Sales wants to share the maps of the spray sites with you and you ask them in an official letter, they might, but they don't have to. And this is a threat to our Indigenous food sovereignty and our free, prior, and informed consent. So the fact that the maps of where BC Timber Sales will be spraying are not available to the public make it so our people cannot protect our berry patches, our mushroom patches, our medicine patches, and we have no way of knowing if our patches have been sprayed in the past. Targeting these traditional foods and medicines disrupts Indigenous people's inherent right to food sovereignty. Article 24 of UNDRIP reads, Indigenous peoples have the right to their traditional medicines and to maintain their health practices, including conservation of their vital medicinal plants, animals, and minerals. So what does consent mean to the forest industry? Most of the chiefs that we spoke to after this whole thing came out didn't know about the pest management plan, or if they had heard of it, they hadn't received a response from BC Timber Sales when they raised their concerns or asked for more information. I also should say that St'at'imc Nation has had a moratorium on spraying since 1980 something. So for like 40 years, we have said as a nation, you cannot spray on our territory. And BC Timber Sales didn't know that, which just shows to me that they have not done a lot of their research. It's also important to consult not only with the chiefs and the band offices, but also with individual berry pickers, mushroom hunters, medicine gatherers, and hunters whose game will be affected by the lack of aspen and other food sources. We have to remember, like, the band system and the Indian Act is imposed upon Indigenous people. So even if the band office says yes to a pest management plan, it's important that individual Indigenous people know about this as well. So when I spoke to BC Timber Sales, the guy who was in charge of this at the time, he's since left actually, but he assured me they went above and beyond when consultating with First Nations about this pest management plan. So what does that mean? I pressed him for numbers. I waited on the phone, I made him go find his notes, and I found out that there were 80 First Nation bands that they had duty to consult with. They sent letters or called those bands and got responses from about 30. So what about the other 50 bands? It doesn't matter, too bad for them. The pest management regulations require that BC Timber Sales reaches out to them, but there doesn't need to be any response from the nation, not even a reply, let alone actual consent. So obviously that consent is bullshit. So now we're going to come to what are some solutions. I was really surprised to learn this, but the entire issue of the pests, of spraying herbicides, of ripping out berry bushes could all be avoided by planting bigger trees. If they plant third and fourth year saplings instead of little first and second year saplings, those trees are big enough so they won't be shaded out by our native broadleaf plants. So why don't they do that? It seems easy, right? They could avoid this entire pest management thing. It's capitalism again. Yep. Yeah, the answer is capitalism. BC Timber Sales told me that planting older saplings is more expensive, so that they have to justify every time they plant an older sapling instead of just spraying it away. But they did tell me that enough public outcry could be the justification to spend that money. So what should we do? End the logging industry? Abolish capitalism altogether? Yes, absolutely. But in the meantime, I finally got my long-awaited meeting with George Heyman, who's the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and I asked him for three main things. I asked him to change the pest management regulations, mandating online notices of pest management plans, online notices of the notice of intent to treat, and the maps. Everything needs to be online. People need access to this. I asked for true consultation with First Nations people and First Nations and individual Indigenous people, not just the band offices. You got to ask our aunties too. And incentives for logging companies to plant third and fourth year saplings to avoid this issue altogether. And here's where you guys come in. I have a template of a letter to send to BC Timber Sales requesting access to the notice of intent to treat and the maps of the spray sites. And the more people that request this information, the more pressure it puts on them to make these things public. But they're not going to do it just because we put pressure on them. We also have to, the government has to be putting pressure on them. So I think we all need to send a letter, which I will have a template for. It's half done. I'll send it out to everyone. To Minister George Heyman, who's the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, requesting changes to the pest management plans, the same ones I requested before. So in conclusion, as far as I see it, you cannot remove one part of an ecosystem like broadleaf plants and expect the ecosystem to be healthy. We have to stop having capitalism as the priority. We have to recognize that without these native broadleaf plants in our forests, we're going to have more fires, we're going to have more flooding, there's going to be mudslides, it's going to affect our salmon stocks, it's going to affect the bears, it's going to affect everything. And we can't expect to be healthy if we're targeting these native broadleaf plants. In our language, we say Tsleil-Waututh and Finnish. I'm sure you've heard many Indigenous people say this before. Many people say all my relations. In our language, it means like everyone is my relative. And, you know, we take that to mean like not just people, the plants and the animals too. And I think it's really important for us to like take a look at and really examine our relationship with the land. And it's easy to do on an individual level somewhat, but we have to find ways to pressure like these logging companies whose main priority is making money, how to do that. So thank you for listening. I'm going to take another little break. This is one of my favorite songs. Somebody tell me, were you able to hear the last song? You have to be honest with me.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
good. I'm going to play this song. It is by Kinney Starr. If you don't know her, you should. Kinney Starr and Adam Shake. It's called Save Our Water.
Oh, it just went quiet. Oh, there it is.
It means water is life, but it also, we say that because those phrases come from a sacred and cosmic relationship with water, taking into our being the origin of water, which is connected to the creation of the universe. This foremost spirit sacrificed its own power and its own blood, which is now water, and the blue dome around the earth, in order to create the universe. So when we say Mini Wichoni, we recognize that water is life, that we're connected to it. We are formed in sacred water in the womb, and that those sacred powers that are in water are also inside of us. So we say water is life with very powerful meaning and depth. Water save the poor, daughters save the poor, great granddaughters. Please don't say no.
Please don't say no.
It means water is life, but it also, we say that because those phrases come from a sacred and relationship with water. Taking into our being the origin of water, which is the creation of the universe. This formal spirit sacrificed its own power and its own blood, which is now water, the blue dome around the earth. In order to create the universe. So when we say mini joy, we recognize that water is life, that we're connected to it. We are formed in sacred water in the womb, and that those sacred powers in water are also inside of us. Say your water, say them for a reaping water, say them for all these days.
Okay, thank you. Of course, I should have told you guys to think of your question and answers in that time, but I was really focused on getting my 5-minute break. So now I'm going to open up the floor. If you guys have any questions, I want to reiterate, I am not an expert at this. I'm very new to this. So there's going to be most questions that I don't have answers to, but I might be able to point you in the direction of an answer. So anyone has any questions, you can go ahead. Oh, people raise their hand, but I can't see who it is. Maybe
it might be me. Hi, Angelina. This is Daniela speaking. Great talk. Thank you so much. I was just wondering if you have any advice specifically for non-Indigenous people on what our responsibilities are for protecting or defending native plants.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would ask people to look into this themselves, look into glyphosate, look into this whole thing. I mean, of course, try to, raise up Native voices, but also something that I've been thinking about is, it might be a little controversial, but I've been thinking a lot about how, as development pushes further and further out, as there's forest fires, as there's flooding, and things like this pest management plan targeting our native plants, there is less and less traditional foods and native plants and medicines available for Indigenous people. And I really encourage non-Indigenous people to begin to think about their relationship with the land and think about their harvesting or foraging practices. So if you're a non-Indigenous person going out berry picking, really think about whose land you're on. If you walk into a giant huckleberry patch and you're like, wow, nobody's ever been here before, I guarantee you that's somebody's family's huckleberry patch. And if they come there and it's picked out, it's going to be, berry picking isn't just a fun activity. It's not just something yummy. It's a traditional food. It has really, really deep ties for Indigenous people. So I would definitely, if you insist on foraging, berry picking, I don't think any non-Indigenous people should be foraging and selling that food, selling mushrooms. I have an issue with that, but I would also just, make sure you're not taking too much. We have to leave some for the bears. We have to leave some for all the other animals that rely on those berries. and medicines as well. So yeah, I would just encourage people to really reevaluate their relationship with the land. I hope that answers your question. Emily Bass, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much. This has been a really informative talk, and I'm really glad that events like these are being put on. But my question, so I actually live in the States, but I'm Canadian as well, and this is an issue that's very, very important to me. Is there any way that people who are not in Canada or are living in the States can help with this movement and like help protect the plants in your territories?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think anybody, I don't know how much the government really reads those letters. I think anyone could be sending these letters and saying, you know, you could say I'm a Canadian even though I live in the States. I think it's much pressure, you know, sharing it to your networks, but also like this is a big issue in the States too. You know, these issues don't stop at the border. There's a lot of glyphosate in the States. I mean, this is a really worldwide issue. So I would look into it in your own community, but also I would still send the letter. They're probably not gonna, you know, look up where you live, but thank you for the question. Any other questions? I see my mom and dad in the chat. They might have a question for me. If they know how to unmute, which I don't know if they do.
I got a question for you too, Angelina.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, you deep dived, or whatever that expression is, deep dove into all this work, and just maybe reflect a little bit more for us on maybe what other folks around you were saying, your aunties, your uncles, your nephews, your cousins, about this idea that you as a young St'at'imc person were, you know, putting this out in public in the way that a lot of folks hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was really nice to hear from, you know, a couple of family members, like they were proud of me over this, but also like the main feeling that I remember is everybody was shocked. Nobody that I spoke to knew that this was happening. Like everyone's heard of Roundup, but you kind of think of it as an issue in the States or maybe an issue that farmers are facing, but you don't think of it in, you know, in your traditional territory. You don't think of it, you know, if you're a hiker on your hikes. It's something that I think a lot of people are shocked about. And for a lot of people that I spoke to, it really kind of, if they had any trust left in the government or in these forestry industries, which most people didn't, but it really broke that. And I think it was really shocking for a lot of people to say, like, why is the government allowing this? How is the government putting our health at risk, putting our water at risk, putting the animals and the plants and the salmon at risk just for the profit, for the logging industry? And I do have to mention, which I didn't put in my slide, that BC Timber Sales is a government. It's a branch of the government. This is a logging company owned by the BC government. So that makes them no better or worse than the other logging companies, but it's important to know that everything that BC Timber Sales done is condoned by the government. So, oh, I think somebody asked a question in the chat. Sorry if I missed this, but curious where we can find information about writing a letter after the workshop. Would be great to post this on social media if there's any links. Yes, I have a letter written up to BC Timber Sales. I'm hoping that we have everyone's email who registered for the Zoom, and I can send a letter template. You can add in your name, your address. Perfect, we do. So we'll email you, everyone out that, and you can, you know, you can change it however you like. You can add in your own concerns. You can send it exactly as it is. Hi, baby Misa. I see my niece. Hi, Rosalie. Hi, you guys are muted. Hi, baby.
Hi. So I have a question, which is obviously I will send however many letters you want about what they're doing on your territory. But I'm wondering how you find out like about pest management plans or things like that. Lisa, Mama's asking a question, Bug, and then you can have up, okay? You want up now? Sorry. But I'm wondering, yeah, how you find out like what pest management plans are in place in other places in the province. Because I know when I was sharing like your posts and things like that this summer, lots of people up here in the north were like, they do the same thing here, but we don't even know where they've sprayed. We don't know what's been in place. We don't know what's under consultation, et cetera.
Yes, there is a website and I will find it and I can send it out if other people are interested too. So the government is supposed to, the government, they say that, a lot of this information is out there, but it's really hard to access. So, I mean, basically all these pest management notices, they only go in the newspapers. I think there should be a record of them online, but that's a really good question. I'm going to find out. I mean, they say that they're working on this, putting it all online. They say that when I spoke to Heyman a couple days ago, he said that they have some more funding and they're going to look into putting everything online. But really, I mean, it's 2022. These pest management plans need to be online. It's ridiculous that they're not available. And that definitely is one of the things that I'm going to pressure them into. I hope that answers your question. I don't think it does.
It answers my question in that I will bug you later about whether you have found the information, but I appreciate you offering to find it.
Yeah, I know I've seen it somewhere, but those government websites are a really big mess. So, but I can find it for sure. Any other questions from anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Great job, by the way.
Thanks, Dad.
And I was wondering, do you have any worries about the berries that you pick now? To eating them? Is there any way to test for contamination in them? And the second question is, I've really noticed that there's a lot less berry picking sites available. Generally speaking, like when I was a kid, it was everywhere, and it's less and less and less. Is there any thought given to like replanting some of the sites, like eventually when we know they're not going to be sprayed, or is that too far down the road?
I mean, that's a really good question. It's not something I've thought about. I definitely, to answer your first question, I definitely think about the berries that we picked. All the BC timber sales, like their jurisdiction is over Crown land, which is often where Indigenous people go to pick berries, because of course all Crown land is Indian land. It's all our land. It doesn't belong to the Crown. But also, huckleberries, after there's a forest fire, after an area has been logged, they're the first thing to grow back. So often, like I said, when you walk into a huckleberry patch, that, now when I walk into a huckleberry patch, I think, has this been sprayed? When's the last time it's been sprayed? And it is hard to find out. You can file a Freedom of Information request to see the past places where they've sprayed. And then there's no time limit, there's no time constraints in that situation. So it would be helpful. I haven't done that, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. I've heard from somebody who's done this for a long time that it's still hard to get access to the information of where they've sprayed. Of course, they have to put up those little bags like over a tree and little signs, but those only have to be up for like a couple of days as far as I understand. So I definitely have thought about it. I worry about our traditional foods, but at this point, it's so hard to find out if they've been contaminated or not. Although you can send them to a lab. I have heard about that. But to answer your second question, I think that's a great idea. I didn't think about replanting, but I think that's a really good idea. We need to, in these forestry, they call them like plantations, like where they've cut it down and where they replant all the trees. They only allow a certain amount of deciduous trees. They want those coniferous trees because they're supposed to be better for logging. So, one of the other, this is something that I do need to look more into. I don't fully understand it, but I know especially James from Stop the Spray is really pressuring the government to increase the amount of deciduous trees that are allowed within a plantation. So right now it's a really low percentage. I think it's 2%, or it might even be lower. It's a really small amount. So if that were to be increased, there wouldn't be as much issues. There wouldn't be as much spraying and ripping out these berry bushes. So.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you. Let somebody else ask a question.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else has a question. We have a little bit of time left.
I'll come in with another one. Or is Heidi gonna ask?
Sure, we'll go to Heidi.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, Angelina. Thank you for this wonderful presentation.
That's my mom.
It was amazing, top notch, stellar. My question is this. What are the main, who are the main contacts in the government that we should be pressuring?
That's a good question. Right now, as far as I understand, I can't say how many hours I spent trying to answer that exact question. Who is in charge of this in the government? Right now, the person that I'm pressuring is George Heyman, Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. That is who, I had a meeting with, and I was working with somebody at BC Timber Sales. He's since moved on from the position and nobody has answered my email since, although I did kind of pressure them, and that same person gave me a call today. He's moved into a different government branch. But so George Heyman, we're going to find out who at BC Timber Sales. I think it might be Elijah Fraser. But really, I think George Heyman is our man right now. He is the person in charge of Carrie Skelly, and Carrie Skelly is the person in charge of pest management plans. Yes. So I think George Heyman would be the person to change these regulations, to update these regulations, to get everything put online, to make these maps accessible, and also to require the logging industry, or require them to plant 3rd and 4th year saplings instead of these little baby trees. Yes. Or give them incentives to do so. So yeah. George Heyman, I think, is our man, and I have a pretty good letter drafted up to him now that I am going to send out to everyone.
Thank you. Great.
Okay. Irwin, do you have one last question?
Sure. George Heyman, former executive director of the Sierra Club of BC. So he's certainly knowledgeable of what you're doing. And so it's just a question of how embedded the NDP government is in the kind of business as usual. And that's often how this is what you're really pushing up against, is the business as usual and the Western science domination over all kind of logic systems. And that's where I think we're really thrilled to host you in research as a researcher in residence, because we're really trying to understand, as a former settler organization, conservation organization, we were part of the problem by looking at wild birds in their habitats and having debates. To be honest, 6 years ago, when I joined the Wild Bird Trust of BC, almost every month, the debates at the board meetings would be on whether to support glyphosate spraying. And so, but what was missing from that debate was indigenous knowledge and issues around land and jurisdiction. So yes, there was these debates around kind of, as you mentioned earlier, which are more maybe common around the prairies, this issue of what do farmers feel about these issues, or but in fact, what we also want to look at is what are the underlying logics that are even allowing the BC government to have an industry first kind of monopolization of unceded lands for resource extraction or monoculture industries. So even reflecting on our little microcosm as the Wild Bird Trust of BC, forgetting that in fact, or being blind or ignorant or in denial of the fact that we can talk about glyphosates as a sort of like toxicity in the environment and not even go as far as saying, well, is it safe for birds? We know it's harmful for salamanders and frogs. If the bird is eating that salamander and frog, then why is it not harmful for the bird, right? Because, oh, well, we're only siloing our research. So the Western science is very much a part of the problem, and it's a long journey for groups, whether it's the Sierra Club that George Heyman used to run or the Wild Bird Trust of BC that I'm leading up. It's a long journey for us to kind of face reality that the colonial system that we're a part of, we're lifting it up by perpetuating this kind of siloing of Western science and the domination of the unceded lands for monoculture resource extraction. So you can't talk about saving wildlife or protecting wildlife without addressing these, in my opinion, as we integrate indigenous knowledge into our work, which is what you're lifting up. Without, if we're in denial and obstructing and perpetuating this terra nullius assumption that we have a better use of the land than the indigenous peoples did, yeah, that's why we're here. And if we are in denial of that, we're really not going to be part of the problem. So I think we really appreciate your research and your public advocacy, because it's really bringing this into a collision. It's saying this business as usual is built on terra nullius assumptions of land management. And if it's protecting birds or protecting the rights of food harvesting, it's all the same issue, is whose jurisdiction, what land management practices are being used, and what is the root obstacle or vision grounding or backing up those land management practices.
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's actually something that George Heyman kind of brought up in our meeting. Like, I kind of did my spiel, and then I barely mentioned glyphosate as a harmful thing. I just mentioned it. And he, started saying, well, glyphosate has been studied and it's not conclusively cancer causing in people. And then he kind of stopped himself and he's like, but as you've been saying, it's not all about the people. And I think that's what Indigenous people have been screaming, for hundreds of years, is that we're not the only ones here. We have to think about the birds. Everyone knows there's a huge decline in bee populations. Without bees, we don't have food. Without salmon, we don't have forests, we don't have cultures. We have to realize, the logging industry, it seems to have a priority in BC, even over the health of British Columbians, over the land. We really need to somehow encourage the government to really re-examine that. And I don't know really how it's going to happen within capitalism, but I'm hoping that we can find a way. Enough public pressure, I think we can really do anything. They weren't hearing this before there was thousands of emails. They didn't care. For a long time, it was just James St'at'imc from Stop the Spray screaming about glyphosate, and not a lot of people heard him. Of course, there's other people. He's the main person I know, but when there's been thousands of people sending emails and sending phone calls, now the government is willing to meet. They're willing to meet you halfway. I don't think it's, it's not really from their hearts. It's just because of public pressure. So I say we put as much public pressure on them as we can.
Good. Awesome. I've got a couple of public announcements to make, but do you want to make a closing comment, or public pressure was your last comment?
I think public pressure, I think Tsleil-Waututh and Finnish, we're all connected. We have to stop being so human-centric. And yeah, send those emails, send them to BC Timber Sale, send them to George Heyman. I'll send them to you. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your support today, everyone.
And we'll share with everybody who's here and people who are watching the recording. There'll be links in the bottom of the YouTube for Angelina's research. And just want to let folks know that the next show coming up at Maplewood Flats is called aptly, for folks who are interested in Angelina's work, this is a suitable title, Repairing Ecological and Cultural Relations. It's a show that looks at sea level rise and the future of Maplewood Flats, and some beautiful work that we're doing here with Tsleil-Waututh. And also coming up is this work tomorrow night, the July 23rd, here at Maplewood Flats. It's a fundraiser for Indigenous youth movement against the pipeline. So we welcome you to come here at Maplewood Flats in Tsleil-Waututh lands here in North Vancouver. And next week, we have the Osprey Festival. Tsleil-Waututh Warriors are performing at 12 noon, and White Feather from Squamish Nation. It's our 15th year. And we just love to have you join us. There's workshops, walks, nature walks, decolonizing conservation talks, and some food. So we welcome everybody on the 30th. And I think, Angelina, you'll be up doing fish harvesting. So you've got a great reason to not be at the Osprey Festival. All right, everybody, thanks very much. And Angelina, so grateful for your time tonight and your commitment to protecting St'at'imc lands and waters, and sharing that struggle with us tonight.
I really appreciate you guys and the work you do too, and hosting me here tonight. Thank you.
Good. Okay, cheers. Thanks, everybody.